Have you ever wondered if there comes a moment when, after giving your best effort, the best thing you can do is remain silent? It may sound contradictory, especially when we are constantly taught to fight, to speak louder, and to try harder. But today, I want to invite you to discover a truth that can change your life. In stillness, you find the strength you have been missing. And when you fully trust in God, He Himself will fight for you. Remember the story of the Israelites as they stood before the Red Sea, pursued by the Egyptian army. In their confusion and despair, they received a promise from God. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. And what happened? When they stood still and trusted, God parted the sea, making a way through the impossible. Maybe you are exhausted from endless battles, your mind overwhelmed with worries, and every solution seems useless. Let me tell you this. Being silent is not surrendering. It is handing over control to the One who knows everything about you. When you stop striving in your own way and allow God to act, the extraordinary happens. He rises up on your behalf and leads you to victory in ways you could never imagine. If you are feeling pressured, if you have tried everything but see no results, this is the moment to pause and listen. Let the peace of God fill your heart and trust in His promises. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. When you let go of fear, your faith will open the door for God's power to work in your life. Before we move on, I want you to say this out loud. Today, I lay down my battles. I believe that God will fight for me. My silence is an opportunity for His power to be revealed. Let this declaration be the beginning of a stronger faith, a deeper peace, and a victory that is closer than you think. Number 1. When silence becomes your greatest strength, trust in the Lord and let Him fight for you. Have you ever felt like everything around you was falling apart? The storms of life come relentlessly, and problems pile up like waves crashing against the shore. In such moments, our natural instinct is to struggle, to fight back with everything we have. But sometimes, despite our best efforts, we still feel powerless. It is in those very moments that an important truth from the Bible resonates. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. Imagine the Israelites trapped between the Red Sea and the Egyptian army. Before them lay the vast sea. Behind them the enemy closed in. From a human perspective, it was a hopeless situation. But God commanded Moses, "Stand still," a command that defied all logic. How could they stand still when danger was so near? Yet it was in that stillness that a miracle occurred. The sea parted, opening the way to deliverance. What does this mean for you? Perhaps you are facing a challenge at work, a family crisis, or a medical diagnosis that has shaken you. Despair may feel like the Egyptian army chasing you down. But remember, this is not your battle. It is the Lord's. However, being still does not mean giving up. Here, being still is an act of faith, an acknowledgement that you cannot control everything and a readiness to let God work. Often, we become so occupied with finding an escape that we forget God is waiting for us to surrender our burdens to Him. Just as Moses not only told the people to stand still, but also followed God's instructions, lifting his staff and acting in faith. When we are willing to listen, miracles happen in ways we could never imagine. How many times have you been so consumed by worries that you could no longer hear God's voice? In those moments, silence is not emptiness. It is the space where God does His work. When you stop fighting on your own, you begin to experience the peace that only God can give. A peace that surpasses all understanding, a comfort that becomes an anchor in life's storms. Look back at the story of the Israelites as the Red Sea parted. As they walked through in awe and gratitude, no one could deny that it was the work of God. The same can happen in your life. You may not see the solution right now, but when you place your full trust in God, you will see how He makes a way. If you are battling illness, continue your treatment, but do not let anxiety consume your mind. Let God do His part. If your family is in conflict, perhaps instead of arguing, you need a moment of silence to pray, allowing God to change what words cannot. If you are struggling financially, surrender your needs to God and wait for His guidance instead of panicking to find a way out. When you learn to trust and be still in faith, you will not only see closed doors open, but you will also be transformed. Your faith will grow stronger, your heart will be steadier, and you will no longer live in anxiety, but walk in a living hope. And the most amazing part, your victory will not be just for you. It will be a testimony for others to witness God's power. Your story will inspire, a testimony to the greatness of the one who fought for you. So be still, trust, and let God fight for you. Number 2, stand firm and witness the victory that God gives you. There are moments when you feel surrounded on all sides, as if 3 great armies are closing in on you. Work pressures, family tensions, and internal struggles that seem never-ending. You give your best effort, yet no way out seems to appear, and your strength is running out. But today, God has a message just for you. You will not have to fight this battle. Take up your positions, stand firm, and see the deliverance the Lord will give you. 2 Chronicles 20:17. Does this sound strange? When everything is in chaos, our instinct is to struggle, to seek control, to find an escape. But in the story of King Jehoshaphat and the people of Judah, they chose a different path. They didn't panic or rush into battle blindly. Instead, they sought the Lord first, and He answered. 3 allied armies came against Judah, but rather than relying on their own strength, Jehoshaphat prayed and called the whole nation to unite in seeking God. The answer they received wasn't a military strategy or a battle plan. It was a miracle. God told them to stand still and watch Him move. Now look at your own battles. Maybe it's a financial struggle, a broken relationship, or a fear that haunts you day and night. In moments like these, God is saying to you the same thing He told Judah. Be still. But don't misunderstand. Being still does not mean giving up. It is an act of faith. It is a decision to trust that God has a greater plan, even if you don't see it yet. Waiting for God's deliverance is not about if He will come through, but when. He always acts at the right time. When you stop trying to control everything yourself and surrender it to Him, you will witness how He makes a way where there is none. Doors that seem permanently closed will open, and problems that seemed impossible will begin to shift. But the greatest blessing is not just the victory itself, it's the journey of faith you will experience. Challenges refine our faith, showing us that God is truly enough for every need. Just as He caused Judah's enemies to turn against one another without them lifting a single weapon, He can turn what seems like a setback into an opportunity for you to see His glory. Maybe right now, you are battling anxiety, trying to control every detail of your life. But perhaps being still means taking time to pray and reminding yourself that God is in control. Maybe you are in conflict with someone, and the solution is not to argue or try to prove your point, but to remain silent, pray, and allow God to work in hearts. Or perhaps you are chasing a dream, but every door seems closed. Being still doesn't mean giving up. It means stopping the pressure on yourself, and trusting that God will open the right door at the right time. The most incredible thing about trusting God is not just the victory, it's the peace you receive even before the battle is over. This is supernatural peace, a confidence that does not come from circumstances, but from knowing that God is working even when you cannot see it. And when victory comes, your faith will be strengthened. You will realize that every challenge is not just a battle, but an opportunity to witness God's power at work. And the best part, your story won't end there. When you share God's faithfulness, others will be encouraged to trust Him more. Because in the end, this is not your battle, it is God's. And when He fights, victory is always yours. Number 3, recognize that He is God and let Him fight for you. Have you ever felt like the world around you was spiraling into chaos? Everything seems out of control, like mountains crumbling, the sea roaring, and your life caught in an unending storm. This is precisely what Psalm 46 describes, a vivid picture of the trials we face, anxiety that clings to us, overwhelming pressure, and difficult decisions that leave us uncertain. Yet, in the midst of all this, God declares, "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10. But being still does not mean sitting idly by, waiting for a miracle to fall from the sky. It is an invitation to pause, to quiet our hearts, and to recognize that we are not the ones in control. God is. He is not surprised by the circumstances we encounter. He already has a perfect plan, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Being still before God does not mean ignoring reality or pretending problems do not exist. On the contrary, it is a way of facing challenges with a new perspective, one that places God at the center, acknowledging that the Creator of heaven and earth is greater than any difficulty we may go through. When God tells us to be still, He is not calling us to inaction, but reminding us that He is in control. He wants us to stop trying to manage everything on our own and instead learn to trust Him. Have you ever prayed so much but still felt like you couldn't hear God? Sometimes we are so busy talking that we forget to listen. But it is in the stillness, when we cease speaking, when we simply rest in His presence, that our spirit becomes more attuned to His voice. When we stop shouting out our worries, we begin to hear His gentle guidance. Stillness is also an act of surrender, letting go of burdens we were never meant to carry alone. How many times have you tried to handle everything by yourself, only to feel more exhausted and helpless? When we choose to let God step in, everything starts to shift. He works in ways we cannot immediately see. But as we start recognizing His hand at work, our faith grows stronger than ever before. When you choose stillness, you do not just receive peace, you gain clarity. Difficult decisions seem less daunting, inner conflicts begin to settle, and your soul is renewed. This is a stillness that is not passive, but an active trust in God. You may not see the solution right away, but you can be certain that He is moving. And when that happens, you are not just transformed, you become a witness to God's power. When you share your testimony of how He sustained you through your darkest moments, you bring hope to others who are also searching for stability in life's storms. Set aside time each day to be still before God. Turn off your phone, close the door, and simply rest in His presence. You don't have to say anything. Just be willing to listen. You may not get an answer right away, but you will experience peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding. Philippians 4:7. No matter how the world shakes, no matter how many uncertainties arise, remember this: be still and know that I am God. When you recognize this truth, You will not only see His power, but also experience His love more deeply than ever before. Trusting in God does not just free you from anxiety, it opens the door to a journey of unwavering and victorious faith. Number 4. The path to receiving strength from God. Life often seems to move too fast, with pressures piling up and important decisions coming at us relentlessly. In these moments, what we desire most is an immediate solution. But have you ever noticed that in the most chaotic times, God calls us to do the exact opposite of what our instincts tell us? He says, "In quietness and trust is your strength." Isaiah 30:15. Imagine the Israelites facing powerful enemies. Instead of relying on God, they sought help from political alliances, depending on human strategies and strength. But through the prophet Isaiah, God reminded them that true deliverance does not come from their plans or tactics. It comes from complete trust and obedience to Him. This truth remains the same for us today. How many times have we tried to solve our problems on our own, leaning on our abilities instead of God's faithfulness? When God speaks of quietness, He is not merely referring to silence or inactivity, but to an inner peace, an attitude of trust that acknowledges He is working, even when we cannot see it. Such trust requires great courage. As humans, we naturally want to control everything, yet God calls us to surrender to His divine providence. Even when we do not understand His plans, we can be assured of one thing: He always has a perfect plan, and He sees what we cannot. The world often glorifies those who are self-reliant, who bear heavy burdens without help. But Scripture offers a different perspective. True strength is not found in carrying more, but in surrendering what is not ours to bear. For when I am weak, then I am strong. 2 Corinthians 12:9-10. It is in our weakness that God reveals His power. The stillness that God calls us to does not just protect us from rash decisions, it guards our hearts from anxiety. When worry overtakes our minds, we lose clarity. But when we seek peace in God, our perspective shifts, allowing us to see problems through His eyes and act with wisdom rather than haste. Moreover, stillness and trust shape our character. They teach us patience, humility, and unwavering faith. Every time we choose to trust instead of worry, our souls grow stronger. And the peace we experience in God becomes a powerful testimony to those around us. When others see how we remain steadfast in the storms of life, they will wonder, "How do you stay so calm?" This is our opportunity to share where our true strength comes from. So how can we practice stillness and trust in our daily lives? It does not mean doing nothing. It means learning to pause and listen to God. Each day, take time in quiet prayer, not just to speak, but to listen. In stressful situations, rather than reacting immediately, take a moment to seek His guidance before making a decision. When facing major life changes, remember that God has already gone before you, preparing the way. Being still before Him does not mean all problems will disappear instantly, but it does bring a peace that surpasses all understanding. Philippians 4:7. The incredible thing is that when we choose to trust God, we do not just experience spiritual peace. We also find restoration mentally and physically. Carrying excessive worry not only weakens our faith, but also takes a toll on our health. But when we place every burden in God's hands, we notice a real difference. Our minds become lighter, our bodies less tense, and our hearts filled with hope. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, when the world demands more than you can bear, remember that you do not need to have all the answers. You do not have to carry everything alone. Pause, seek God, and allow Him to lead you and give you the strength you truly need. Because when we place our trust in Him, we do not just find peace. We discover a lasting strength, a strength that can only come from Him. Number 5, do not let anything make you afraid. God fights for you, and your victory is assured. When facing challenges that seem impossible to overcome, we often feel small and powerless. Life's difficulties stand before us like giants, making us doubt ourselves, hesitate, and even want to give up. But God gives us a powerful promise. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God Himself will fight for you. Deuteronomy 3:22. This is not just a word of comfort. It is a guarantee from Him that you are not fighting alone. Imagine the Israelites on their journey to the Promised Land. They had witnessed incredible miracles, the parting of the Red Sea, manna falling from heaven, the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night leading them. Yet when they faced fortified walls and mighty enemies, fear still gripped them. It's easy to judge them. But aren't we the same? How many times has God proven His faithfulness in our lives, yet each new challenge brings back fear and doubt? Moses reminded the people, "Do not be afraid, for this is not your battle. This is the Lord's battle." Today, our enemies may not be an advancing army, but they are just as intimidating. It could be a financial crisis, a severe illness, a broken relationship, or a dream that seems out of reach. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are not external, but within us: self-doubt, fear, insecurity, and anxiety. The enemy wants you to believe that you are alone, that you cannot win. But that is a lie. The truth is this: the same God who parted the Red Sea and brought down the walls of Jericho is the God who fights for you today. He has not changed, and His promises still stand. This promise is not just about delivering us from difficulties. It reminds us of our identity. We are not weak people living in fear. We are children of the King, born to overcome, not to be defeated. When God says He fights for us, He is declaring that we are never alone, never abandoned, and never have to fear anything. Knowing this, we can walk forward with confidence, even when the path is uncertain. We can sleep peacefully at night, knowing that the outcome does not depend on our strength, but on God's power. And the best part, when we overcome, the glory does not belong to us. It belongs to Him. Others will see God's power at work in our lives, and their faith will also be stirred. How can you live out this promise daily? Apply it in practical ways. Whenever fear creeps in, stop and pray. Lord, I know this is not my battle. I trust that you are fighting for me. Write down your worries, lay them before God, and believe that He will handle them in His way. Move forward with courage. It could mean having a difficult conversation, stepping into something new, or simply persevering when everything seems against you. But no matter how great the challenge, remember that God is with you in every step. Something amazing happens when you start recognizing small victories as signs of God's presence. Maybe a small problem gets resolved, a new opportunity appears, or an unexpected shift happens in a seemingly impossible situation. Celebrate those moments, because when you see God in the little things, your faith will be even stronger when facing bigger trials. When you stand firm in faith, when you refuse to let fear control you, people will notice. They will ask, "How can you stay so calm in the face of difficulty?" And you will be able to say, "Because my God fights for me, and my victory is assured." Living without fear does not mean you will never face challenges. It means that every challenge is an opportunity for God to display His power. We do not fight alone, nor do we rely on our own strength, because the victory belongs to Him. And that is all you need to know to keep moving forward. Number 6, Be strong and courageous. When silence helps you trust in God, take a moment to step into Joshua's shoes. Moses, the great leader of Israel, was gone. Now the entire responsibility of leading the people into the promised land rested on his shoulders. Before him stood fortified cities, powerful enemies, and a mission that seemed too great to bear. Fear could have easily overtaken him. But in that crucial moment, God spoke a command that changed everything. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1:9. This was not merely a suggestion, it was a command. God did not tell Joshua to rely on his own strength. He did not require him to have a perfect strategy or absolute control. The strength God demanded came from recognizing that he was always with Joshua. It was God's presence that was the true source of strength. And this truth remains the same for us today. You may not be leading a nation into battle, but you face your own challenges. Perhaps it's a new job, a tense family situation, or a difficult decision that leaves you feeling uncertain. In those moments, God still whispers the same words to you. Be strong and courageous, for I am with you. We often associate courage with immediate action, running fast, doing something big. But sometimes the bravest act is to stop, to remain silent, to refuse to fight in our own strength, and instead place our trust in God, waiting for His guidance. Courage is not always shown through external action, but through a quiet reliance on the Lord. Fear often reveals how much we depend on ourselves. We worry because we crave control. But when we choose to be still, when we choose to trust in God's presence, something powerful happens. We begin to see things from His perspective. The challenges remain, but they no longer overwhelm us. Because we know that God is with us, and that changes everything. God did not command Joshua to be strong and courageous just for the sake of it. He did not tell him to act fearless to prove himself. Joshua's strength had a purpose. It was to fulfill God's plan, to lead His people into the promised land. Your strength has a purpose too. Every challenge you face is not random, but part of God's greater plan. You may feel weak or incapable, but remember, God is not asking you to rely on yourself. He is calling you to trust in His power, because His plan is greater than any fear you may have. Your strength and courage do not only affect you, they impact those around you. When you face hardships with faith, when you choose to trust God instead of panicking, you inspire others. Your family, friends, and community will see the peace you walk in, and they will ask, "How do you stay so strong?" That is your opportunity to testify. It is God who gives me strength. We often think of courage as making bold moves, but sometimes courage means pausing. It means staying silent. It means choosing not to rush into a battle with your own strength, but instead waiting on God and trusting that He will act. True bravery is not just seen in what we do, but in our ability to trust, even in the stillness. We worry because we want to control everything. But when we choose to remain silent, to trust in God's presence, something miraculous happens. We begin to see everything through His perspective. The challenges remain, but we no longer feel overwhelmed, because we know that God is with us, and that changes everything. God did not tell Joshua to be courageous without reason. He did not tell him to be strong just to prove himself. Joshua's strength had a purpose. It was to fulfill God's plan, to lead the people into the promised land. Your strength is the same. Every challenge you face is not random, but part of God's greater plan. You may feel weak, as if you cannot continue. But remember, God does not ask you to rely on yourself. He calls you to trust in His power. Because His plan is greater than any fear you may have. Your strength and courage do not only affect you, but also those around you. When you face difficulties with faith, when you choose to trust God instead of panicking, you will inspire others. Your family, your friends, and your community will see how you walk in peace, and they will want to know, how can you stand firm like this? And that is the opportunity for you to testify. It is the Lord who gives me strength. Whatever challenge you are facing, a major transition, a new project, an unresolved conflict, or deep wounds, remember that the solution always begins with seeking God first. Take time in stillness to pray, to surrender your fears to Him, and to seek His guidance. It is in that stillness that you will find the peace and strength that no one else can give. Strength from God does not mean you will never be afraid again, but fear will no longer have control over you because you know that the Almighty One is with you. Every step you take in trust will strengthen your faith, and when you look back, you will see how God's faithfulness has been with you throughout the journey. That will help you stand even firmer for the challenges ahead. Finally, just like Joshua, you will realize that when you obey God's call to be strong and courageous, you will witness His presence in the most miraculous ways. Your story will not just be a personal journey, but also a source of hope for others. Because every victory you have, whether big or small, is proof that God not only promises to be with you, but He always keeps His promises. Number 7, when your own wisdom is not enough, trust in God with all your heart. Many times, we believe that as long as we have a good plan, make rational decisions, and take the safest path, life will go smoothly. But then, God gives us a powerful reminder in Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. This verse challenges us. Why does God tell us not to rely on our own wisdom? Isn't reasoning a gift He has given us? The key here is not to reject intelligence or logic, but to recognize their limits. We may see only part of the story, but God sees it all, past, present, and future. He knows things we cannot, and His plans are always greater than anything we could imagine. Think of Solomon, the wisest man in history. He wrote these words in Proverbs. If anyone could rely on their own wisdom, it was him. Yet even Solomon understood that human wisdom has its limits. We only see one step at a time, but God already knows the entire journey. God doesn't want us to trust Him partially. He wants full trust. Yet sometimes we hold on to a plan B, just in case God doesn't act the way we want. But half-hearted trust does not bring true peace. God calls us to surrender everything into His hands because only then can we fully experience His provision, His guidance, and His power. This does not mean we should live recklessly or ignore wisdom. Rather, God calls us to use our understanding. But when we reach its limits, we must step forward in faith. There will be times when we cannot find a solution. That is when God invites us to trust Him completely. When we do, He will make a way, leading us down the best path, even if it differs from our original plan. Logic often tells us to seek security, avoid risk, and stick to what is familiar. But faith challenges us to step outside our comfort zones, believing that God has a greater plan. Think about the major decisions in your life, career choices, moving to a new place, or stepping into a relationship. It's easy to rely on our own calculations, but God calls us to seek Him first. When we do, we begin to see doors open in ways we never expected. This is also true in our finances. When times are tough, logic tells us to save every penny and avoid risk. But often, God challenges us to give even when it seems impossible. And when we obey, we witness His miraculous provision in ways beyond our understanding. In relationships, human wisdom often tells us to keep our distance, hold grudges, or protect our pride. But God calls us to love, to forgive, and to seek peace. When we follow His lead, we experience transformation, not just in ourselves, but in those around us. When we fully trust in God, our lives become aligned with His will. Crooked paths become straight, obstacles are removed, and we find peace, even in uncertainty. Each time we look back and see God's faithfulness, our trust in Him grows stronger. We can confidently say, God has always been there, and He will continue to lead my way. Not only that, but our faith also impacts those around us. When people see how we walk with God, they begin to wonder what gives us peace in the face of challenges. That is our opportunity to share about a trustworthy God, one whose plans are higher, wiser, and better than anything we could imagine. So if you are standing at a crossroads, unsure of what to do, remember Proverbs 3:5. Do not rely on your own understanding, but trust in God with all your heart. When you do, you will see that His plan is not just better, it is the best plan for your life. Number 8, casting your burdens. When prayer leads you to peace and inner stillness. Worry can feel like an invisible weight, suffocating us. It wraps around our minds, steals our peace, and floods our hearts with endless thoughts. But in God's Word, there is a piece of advice that can change everything. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:6-7. This is more than just a reminder to pray. It is an invitation to lay down our burdens and find a safe refuge in God's presence. When the Apostle Paul wrote these words, he was not living a life of comfort. He was in prison, stripped of his freedom, and uncertain of what lay ahead. Yet, even in those circumstances, he did not drown in anxiety. Instead, he reminded believers of a powerful truth. Worry solves nothing, but prayer changes everything. He chose to pray, to give thanks, and to rest in the peace that comes from God, a peace that cannot be explained by human logic. The first step to experiencing this peace is recognizing the power of prayer. We often try to handle everything on our own, storing up stress in our hearts instead of surrendering it to God. But as Paul reminds us, we should bring everything to God. He already knows what we need, but He wants us to come to Him so that we learn to fully trust Him. Prayer does not just change our circumstances, it transforms our hearts. When we pray, we lay down our burdens and allow God to work. Paul also emphasizes something special: gratitude. Sometimes anxiety arises because we focus only on what is lacking or on the worst possible outcomes. But when we remember what God has already done, our faith is strengthened. Gratitude is like a light that dispels the darkness of doubt, reminding us that God has always been faithful and will continue to take care of us. The peace that God gives is not like the world's peace. It is not dependent on circumstances. It is a peace that surpasses understanding, a deep inner stillness, even when storms still rage around us. When God's peace reigns, the noise of anxiety is silenced, and we can hear His voice more clearly. The problems may not disappear immediately, but they will no longer have the power to control our emotions. This peace not only protects our hearts from despair, but also strengthens our faith. When we live in God's peace, we learn to wait with trust, knowing that He is still working even when we do not see the results yet. And the most amazing part is that this peace does not just impact us, it becomes a powerful testimony. When others see our calmness in the face of adversity, they will ask, "How do you have such peace?" And that gives us the opportunity to share that it all comes from trusting in God. So how can we practice this peace daily? Make prayer a regular habit, not just in times of trouble. Before going to bed, take a moment to thank God for the day and surrender your worries to Him. As you start a new day, commit your plans into His hands and ask for His guidance. When stress builds up at work or in your studies, pause for a short prayer. Even a brief moment can make a big difference. This also applies to relationships. When facing conflict, instead of reacting immediately, bring your emotions to God first. Ask Him for peace, wisdom, and words that lead to reconciliation. You will be surprised at how He softens tense situations and transforms hearts on both sides. As we practice living in God's peace, the changes will not only be spiritual, but will also affect our mental and physical well-being. Stress and anxiety will no longer control us. Our minds will be clearer, our bodies will no longer carry the weight of tension, and we will learn to trust in His good plans. So if you feel overwhelmed by worries, remember that you do not have to carry the burden alone. Surrender everything to God. Pray with a heart of gratitude, and let His peace guard your soul. As you walk in that peace, you will not only experience a life free from the grip of anxiety, but also become a living testimony of God's faithfulness and power. Number 9, do not fear. God is beside you and will lift you up in stillness and trust. Fear is one of the most common human emotions. Everyone has experienced moments of anxiety, worry, and uncertainty when facing the unknown. In those moments, God reminds us, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Isaiah 41:10. Have you ever paused to reflect on the power of this promise? When God tells us do not fear, He is not denying the reality of our struggles. Instead, He affirms that His presence is greater than any fear we might face. The context of Isaiah 41 was a time of great instability. The Israelites were surrounded by powerful enemies, facing oppression and loss. They felt exhausted, confused, and possibly hopeless. But in the midst of it all, God declared, "Do not fear, for I am with you." This promise was not just for Israel. It is for anyone who places their trust in Him, including you today. Fear itself is not a sin. It is a natural human response. But if left unchecked, fear can dictate our decisions, weaken our faith, and steal our peace. The enemy seeks to use fear to make us doubt God's promises. However, one simple truth can change everything. The awareness of God's presence significantly reduces fear. This does not mean our circumstances will change instantly, but knowing that the Almighty holds us brings a peace beyond words. God never promised an easy road, but He did promise to walk with us through every challenge. When you face uncertainty, overwhelming pressures, or trials that seem impossible, remember that God is right there beside you. He also tells us, do not be dismayed. Mental and emotional exhaustion, the feeling of being unable to continue, these struggles are real. But God reminds us that when our hearts grow weary, we must remember the one who holds us. In the stillness of our souls, in the quiet moments when we seek Him, we will hear His guidance most clearly. God is not a distant deity watching from afar. He is near. He is a loving Father who cares for every detail of our lives. When He says, "I am your God," it means that you belong to Him, and He is committed to protecting you. His presence is the foundation of our peace, no matter how unstable the world around us may seem. Understanding that we are God's children changes everything. We no longer have to seek our worth in human approval or rely on our own strength. God has already declared, "You are mine, and I will uphold you." When we grasp this truth, we begin to live with a completely different mindset. How can we apply this trust in daily life? Each of us has personal fears, whether it's about the future, failure, or losing something important. In those moments, bring your worries before God in prayer. Say to Him, "Lord, I am afraid, but I trust that you are with me." Seek guidance from wise believers if needed, but always remember that God is ultimately the one leading you. Major life changes often bring anxiety. Moving to a new city, starting a new job, entering a new relationship. Yet no matter what the situation, God's promise remains. "Do not fear, for I am with you." Whether you face illness, financial struggles, or emotional battles, God is holding your hand. He will never leave you. He is your strength to keep going. When you experience God's peace in the storms of life, it becomes a living testimony to those around you. They will see the difference in you, a steadfastness, a trust that is not shaken by circumstances. And they will wonder, how do you stay so strong? That is your opportunity to share that God is your source of strength. Living with the assurance of God's presence results in deep peace that is not dependent on external circumstances. No matter how turbulent the world may be, you remain steady because you know you are in the hands of the Almighty. This peace does more than calm your emotions. It gives you the courage to act decisively. You will be ready to step out of your comfort zone and face challenges, knowing that you are never alone. And finally, those who once saw you as fearful and anxious will witness a transformed person, someone who walks in confidence, strengthened by faith in God. They will see that the person who once trembled in fear now stands firm, and that will be the clearest evidence of God's power and faithfulness. Number 10. Let go of the burden. Cast your worries on God and find peace. Worry is a reality many of us face daily. You might feel overwhelmed by work pressures, financial struggles, or a sense of losing control over your life. But here's the good news. You don't have to carry it all alone. In 1 Peter 5:7, God invites us, "Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you." This is not just advice. It is a firm promise from the one who loves us. The Apostle Peter wrote these words to believers facing persecution and trials. They lived in uncertainty, fear, and constant pressure. In such circumstances, worry seemed inevitable. But Peter didn't just tell them to be patient. He invited them to lay all their burdens on God because He truly cares for them. The same is true for us today. Our situations may be different, but anxiety is still a part of life. That's why this invitation remains relevant. Give all your worries to God. The key word here is cast. It is not just acknowledging that we are worried, but actively placing those burdens into God's hands. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack on your shoulders, then deciding to take it off and give it to someone much stronger. When we cast our anxieties on God, we are truly letting them go and allowing Him to handle them in His way. We often think that some worries are too small to bring to God, but the Bible clearly states that He cares about every detail of our lives. Whether it's an unresolved conversation or a hidden fear about the future, if it steals your peace, it is worth placing in His hands. Nothing is too small or too big for Him. Casting our worries on God also requires inner stillness. In moments when our minds are crowded with thoughts, God invites us to pause, be still, and recognize our limitations. When we admit that we cannot handle everything on our own, we begin to see His limitless power. This is not surrendering in defeat. It is an act of faith, trusting that God truly cares and that He will act. A significant part of this verse is the assurance that He cares for you. This means God is not distant or indifferent to what you're going through. He doesn't just watch from afar. He genuinely cares, loves, and is willing to carry your burdens for you. This realization can completely change the way you see your struggles. It also means changing how we live each day. If God invites us to cast all our burdens on Him, we must actively practice doing so. One simple way is to write down your worries, pray over them, and surrender them to God. Say, "Lord, I place this in your hands. I trust you will handle it in the best way." This simple action can bring a deep sense of relief, reminding you that God is in control. Setting aside quiet time each day is also essential. Take a few moments to pause, breathe, and tell God that you trust Him. It could be a short prayer in the middle of a busy workday or a moment of reflection before bed. Even a few minutes of stillness can make a big difference in your heart and mind. Equally important is seeking help from those around you. Sometimes God cares for us through other people, a friend, a mentor, or a family member. Don't be afraid to share your burdens with those who can help you, because that too is part of God's plan for you. When we practice casting our anxieties on God, the results are incredible. We experience a new sense of peace, no longer living under the constant weight of stress, but finding relief and rest. We no longer have to control everything ourselves because we know God is holding it all. Even more, when we are freed from anxiety, we can focus on what truly matters, helping others. When our minds are no longer consumed by our own burdens, we can be more present, listen better, and offer encouragement to those around us. The peace we receive from God can become a guiding light for those still struggling with anxiety. Ultimately, when we truly trust and surrender our burdens to God, our lives become lighter, more meaningful, and more aligned with His good plan. We will no longer let worry control us, but instead walk forward in confidence and peace, knowing that God holds our future in His hands. Number 11. Rest in God. Recognize the only one who sustains you and find hope. We live in a world that constantly pushes us to keep moving, stay busy, and continuously pursue new goals. Our schedules are filled with work, responsibilities, and expectations, to the point that we sometimes forget something important. God invites us to come to Him for rest. In Psalm 62, verse 5, David writes, "Yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from Him." This verse is a powerful reminder that not only do our bodies need rest, but our souls also need the peace that only God, the one who sustains us, can give. When writing these words, David was going through extremely difficult times. He was surrounded by enemies, feeling alone, and had nowhere to find safety. He understood that true protection did not come from power or political alliances, but only from God. His declaration was not just an expression of faith, but also a deliberate decision to seek rest and hope in God, something we can all learn from. One remarkable aspect of David's words is how he reminds himself, "Yes, my soul, find rest in God." He did not wait for his emotions to change automatically. Instead, he actively commanded his heart to turn to God. When anxiety, fear, or doubt overwhelm us, we can do the same. We can remind ourselves to return to God, seek His presence, and place our full trust in Him. This rest is not passive, but intentional. It requires us to pause in the midst of life's busyness, silence the distractions around us, and focus on the only one who can bring true peace. It is a choice to trust in God, even when everything around us seems chaotic. The word only in Psalm 62, verse 5 is significant. True rest cannot be found in money, fame, success, or even in people. If we seek peace in these things, we will always feel empty and insecure. David pointed out that only when we place our trust in God can we find true comfort. One of the things that prevents us from resting in God is the inner noise, the worries, unfinished plans, and invisible fears. We get caught up in the cycle of things that haven't happened yet instead of listening to His gentle voice. God cannot reveal His peace to us if our hearts are too noisy to hear Him. That is why spending quiet time in God's presence is so important. The reason we can rest in God is because He is our true source of hope. Everything in life can change. People may break promises, circumstances may turn unexpectedly, but God never changes. When we place our hope in Him, we are building on an unshakable foundation. Even when life is full of challenges, having a firm place to put our hope helps us stand strong. This applies practically in daily life. We face heavy workloads, social pressures, and ever-growing expectations. But even in the middle of all that, we can create small moments to remind ourselves, "Yes, my soul, find rest in God." It could be a short prayer in the morning, a moment of stillness in a busy day, or a quiet reflection before bed. These moments help us refocus on God and find peace even in the most stressful situations. Additionally, if we base our self-worth on work, appearance, or relationships, we will always feel insecure. But when we realize that our identity does not come from these things, but from God's unconditional love, we can truly rest. When we understand that He loves us not because of what we do, but because of who we are, our souls no longer strive to prove themselves. So what about when we fail or fall? Life doesn't always go as planned, and failures can hurt us. But when we place our hope in God, we understand that failure does not define us. He not only lifts us up, but also helps us move forward, not by our own strength, but by His grace. Knowing that God holds our future allows us to face every challenge without fear. The result of resting in God is astonishing. When we let go of our burdens and trust in Him, we experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. We are no longer swept up in the hurried pace of the world, but live with a steady and secure heart. This peace not only benefits us, but also serves as a powerful testimony to those around us. When they see us remaining calm through life's storms, they will wonder what our secret is. And that becomes the opportunity for us to testify about the one who gives us true rest. So whenever you feel overwhelmed, anxious, or lost, remember David's reminder, "Yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from Him." Seek rest in God, because only He can give you true peace and a hope that never fades. Number 12. Taking refuge under the Almighty's shadow. Peace and security in uncertain times. When facing life's challenges, where do you seek refuge? What do you rely on when fear and worry overwhelm your mind? In Psalm 91, verse 1, there is a powerful invitation. "Whoever dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." This is not just a promise of protection, but a way of life, a continual trust in God's shelter. The imagery used by the psalmist is powerful. A shadow that is not just a temporary covering, but a lasting place of refuge. The shadow of the Almighty does not merely shield, it comforts and provides rest. No matter what we face, if we remain under His wings, no force can destroy us. Psalm 91 was written during a time of difficulty when the Israelites faced strong enemies and dangers on all sides. David, who knew what it was like to be surrounded by threats, found his refuge in God. He did not depend on armies or human strength, but placed his complete trust in the presence of the Lord. For David, this was not just a statement of faith, but a matter of survival, a call to seek God as the only true shelter. One key word in this verse is dwell, meaning not just turning to God in times of trouble, but living in His presence daily. God is not a temporary escape. He is an eternal home for those who trust in Him. This is more than just praying in times of distress. It is a lifestyle of dependence and closeness to God. The shadow of the Almighty is not just protection from danger, it represents intimacy with Him. You cannot stand under someone's shadow unless you are close to them. This means that when you live near God, you will always be under His protection and peace. His presence is a refuge from the heat of life's pressures, a shade in the storms of the world. Sometimes, the world around us is filled with the noise of fear and anxiety. But under God's shadow, we can find stillness and hear His voice. When you take time to be in His presence, you will realize that God is in control of everything, even when you cannot see the path ahead. Faith in Him allows you to know that no circumstance is beyond His control. Living under the Almighty's shadow not only makes you feel safe, but also gives you confidence to face life. When you know that God is protecting you, worry will no longer control you. This does not mean life will be without challenges, but it does mean you do not have to face them alone. God is not just a physical protector. He guards your emotions and spirit. The more you experience His protection, the stronger your faith becomes. Many believe that living under God's protection means avoiding responsibility or living passively. But in reality, His protection empowers us to step out with courage, to face difficulties without being overwhelmed by fear. When you know that God is in control, you can work, study, and face life without anxiety or panic. This truth is especially relevant in times of crisis, whether a global pandemic, economic downturn, or unexpected life changes. When the world becomes unstable, we can find comfort in knowing that God is never caught off guard. He already knows everything and has a perfect plan for each of us. So how can you live under the Almighty's shadow? Oh, one practical way is to create intentional space for God in your daily life. This could be quiet time in the morning, a small prayer corner in your home, or simply a whispered prayer in the middle of a busy day. When you actively seek God, you are practicing dwelling in His presence. Additionally, when facing spiritual, emotional, or even personal struggles, remember that your refuge is in God. Instead of looking for comfort in temporary things, turn to Him, the only one who can give you true peace. When you choose to remain under His shadow, you will find strength even in your weakest moments. Living under God's protection not only benefits you, but also impacts those around you. In a world full of uncertainty, those who walk in God's peace become a source of inspiration for others. When they see your calmness in the face of adversity, they will ask, "How can you be so at peace?" And that will be your opportunity to share that your peace comes from dwelling under the Almighty's shadow. The result of a life fully trusting in God is unshakable peace. When everything around you seems to be falling apart, you will remain standing because you know you are protected by the one who reigns over all. This peace is not temporary. It is an unbreakable assurance that you are never alone. Faith becomes your shield against life's storms, and intimacy with God allows you to hear His voice more clearly. Make the decision today to live in God's protection. Draw near to Him, trust Him, and let Him be your safest refuge. When you do this, you will not only find peace for yourself, but also become a light for those searching for shelter in this uncertain world. Number 13, let go of revenge. Let God act and find peace in His justice. Have you ever felt the weight of an injury? Perhaps it was an injustice you had to endure, a deep wound in your heart, and your natural reaction is to seek revenge. When we are hurt, we often want the person who harmed us to face the consequences. But in Romans 12:19, Paul gives us a completely different teaching. Do not avenge yourselves, dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay," says the Lord. This is not just advice, but an invitation for us to put our complete trust in God's righteousness. It's hard to follow this teaching, especially when we feel deeply hurt. When Paul wrote this letter, Christians were suffering persecution and being treated unfairly simply because of their faith. Yet, he didn't call for retaliation, but encouraged them to entrust everything to God, who will handle all matters perfectly. Even Jesus taught this. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Matthew 5:44. Revenge is not only unnecessary, but can also prolong the hurt and suffering. Breaking the cycle of vengeance is an act of faith. The desire for revenge often comes from wounds that have not yet healed. When we are hurt, we feel powerless, humiliated, or betrayed, and taking revenge seems like the only way to restore justice. But have you ever realized that revenge only exacerbates the suffering? It doesn't heal the wounds, but traps us in the past, forcing us to continue living in pain instead of moving forward. Letting go of revenge is an act of faith. When we say, "God, I surrender this pain to you," it's not surrender, but trust. We believe that God sees everything, knows the hearts of men, and His justice is perfect. If we take matters into our own hands and seek revenge, we limit God's work. But when we trust in the promise, "Vengeance is mine," we not only release those who have harmed us, but also free ourselves from bitterness and resentment. Remember that God has shown us unconditional mercy. If He has forgiven us even though we were undeserving, why do we still harbor anger in our hearts? When we choose to forgive and surrender everything to God, we are following His example. This does not mean we accept injustice or condone evil, but we place everything in the hands of God, the only one who can bring perfect justice. This also has profound meaning in our daily relationships. When betrayed by friends, hurt in our families, or treated unfairly at work, our first reaction may be to retaliate. But if, instead of letting anger overwhelm us, we pause, pray, and surrender everything to God, He will work within us. In doing so, we not only find peace ourselves, but also create opportunities for reconciliation and healing. Choosing to let go of revenge does not mean ignoring our pain. It means refusing to let that pain control our lives. When we place this burden in God's hands, we open the way to true peace. This peace does not come from things being resolved the way we want, but from the certainty that God is at work, and He will bring about justice in His timing. When a person chooses to live in forgiveness and trust in God's justice, it creates a profound impact. People will notice the difference in how you react to adversity. When you face harm, but still maintain peace and refuse to let hatred control you, they will ask, "How can you do that?" And that is an opportunity for you to testify about God, the one who has given you the strength to walk in love instead of bitterness. In the end, living in God's peace doesn't mean denying the injustices or pain you've experienced. It means acknowledging that while the hurt is real, you don't have to carry the burden of revenge. Let God do His work, and you will find the peace, restoration, and freedom that only He can give. Number 14. When you call out with a humble heart. exploring a God who listens and delivers. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by life's difficulties? Those times when it feels like there's no way out, and all you can do is cry out from the depths of your soul? The wonderful thing about God is that He doesn't just listen, He answers. In Psalm 34:17 it says, "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles." This is not just a promise, but a firm assurance. When we grasp this truth, how we face adversity changes entirely. God never remains indifferent to the pain of those who seek Him earnestly. The psalmist, David, went through countless moments of intense pressure, being pursued and surrounded by danger. What Psalm 34 teaches us is that calling out is not merely a reaction to desperation. It is a confession of faith, a surrender to God's justice and love. When we truly cry out, it's not a shallow prayer or a routine request, but a cry from the heart, a recognition that we cannot solve everything on our own. God is not looking for eloquent words. He desires sincerity. When we come to Him with broken hearts, He does not reject us, but embraces us with infinite mercy. After we cry out, what is needed is not always an immediate answer, but the silence to listen for God. A delay in response does not mean God hasn't heard. Sometimes He uses that time to work within our hearts. In those quiet moments, we feel His presence more clearly, and His peace fills our souls. The deliverance may not come in the way we expect, but His peace will enable us to keep walking forward in full faith. The promise, He delivers them from all their troubles, does not mean God will remove every trial from our lives, but He will give us the strength to overcome them. His deliverance is not just physical. It also brings restoration to our spirit and emotions. God desires complete healing, from the wounds of the soul, past hurts, to the lost hopes. When we experience God's deliverance, gratitude naturally fills our hearts. But even more miraculous is the fact that when we live in God's peace, it not only affects us, but extends to those around us. The greatest testimony of a powerful God is a life transformed by His love and deliverance. But what if God's answer doesn't come immediately? Sometimes He calls us into a journey of perseverance and prayer. There are times when deliverance does not come right away, but that doesn't mean God doesn't care. On the contrary, He's using this time to refine our faith, teaching us to trust in Him without seeing immediate results. As we continue to pray with patience, our faith is strengthened, and we see God's faithfulness through each stage of life. Every time we call out in humility and are delivered by God, our relationship with Him deepens. We begin to understand more clearly who He is, an unconditional loving Father who is always near and ready to act on behalf of His children. We no longer feel alone in our struggles, because we know that God is walking with us on this journey. No circumstance is too difficult for His power, and nothing is too small for Him to care about. And it is precisely when we experience God's deliverance that we become an inspiration to those around us. When others see how God has acted in our lives, they will be encouraged to place their trust in Him. The peace we receive from God is not just for ourselves. It's an invitation for others to know that they too can find peace and true freedom in Him. The peace that the world cannot give is the result of a heart fully trusting in God. When we understand that God is always listening, always acting, and always loving, we will no longer be controlled by worry or fear. It is in this surrender that we find true freedom. A freedom not limited by circumstances, but rooted in the firm foundations of God. We've walked together on a meaningful journey, exploring Bible passages that remind us that we are never alone in life's challenges. Each verse, each reflection points to a firm truth. God fights on your behalf. When you choose silence, set aside your worries and make room for His powerful intervention that is the act of faith. Silence is not surrender. It is a decision full of strength. When you stop fighting in your own way and trust God, you are telling Him, "Lord, this battle belongs to you. I will rest in your care." It is in that rest that He gives you the strength, peace, and determination that only He can provide. The passages we've meditated on are not just distant promises, but invitations to draw closer to God. As you apply these principles in your life, you will see that worries begin to fade before the certainty that the Almighty God is walking with you, opening doors that once seemed closed. Moreover, your faith can become a light to those around you. When you live in trust and victory, you will inspire those who are also searching for peace in God. If this message has touched your heart, share it with others who need to hear that they are not fighting alone. They too can find rest and hope in the one who never fails. If you wish to continue your journey of faith and grow closer to God, keep following and receiving more of His Word. If you've read this far, it shows that you are committed to spiritual growth and always longing to draw nearer to God. Your perseverance proves that you are on a path of discovering wisdom and strengthening your faith. Continue to seek God and let Him lead you every step of the way. The journey to draw near to God is not a destination, but an ongoing, meaningful journey. These reflections are made to help everyone, regardless of age, draw closer to God, rediscover truths that may have been forgotten, and dive deeper into His Word. If you are walking this journey with us, leave a comment. I am drawing closer to God, so we can encourage each other and walk in faith together.